The early college high school students are probably so sick of us talking about our adult problems.
Just one. Just wait, and then the bills, and then everything. It's just like, oh.
My niece is a freshman in high school, and she always complains to me about how horrible high school is. I'm like, that's easy.
Yeah. I was like, I miss those things.
I miss high school and I miss college. Those were easy times. Like when I was a full-time student and I didn't have a job.
And you just.
Yeah. That was so easy.
When I first started college, I graduated from a private school here and just actually dropped out and went online, finished high school in 3 months and went here.
Yeah.
And then I was not prepared.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun. You know, I felt like a 10-year-old in a Bayo college.
Right.
I was super young. Oh, man.
But yeah, moral of the story, don't complain.
Yeah.
It gets worse. Not, it could get worse, it gets worse.
It does.
Okay, so, Brandon probably noticed the last class was here fairly late today. That was after I took about 20 images out of the presentation today. So it's a long one. Tomorrow is also going to be a long one, unfortunately, just because chapters 23 and 24 are the longest chapters in your textbook. So there's a lot of information. But ironically enough, chapters 23 and 24 cover the shortest amount of time in art history. So thus far in this course, each day we've been going through at least 200 years worth of art history. I know it doesn't seem like it, but we have been. Today and tomorrow we're only going to be doing, well, today we're only going to be doing 3 decades. Tomorrow we're only doing 1 decade. And they're the longest chapters. So that just tells you that from World War I until present, a lot is changing rapidly. Each country is going to have their own art style that they're really well known for, particularly in this chapter. Meaning we're going to be focusing more so today on countries and the individual styles they've produced versus art movements themselves. We'll still talk about art movements, but not in the way that we've been talking about them so far. It's a little bit different. And the art that we're discussing today is going to be very intertwined with world affairs. So like I said, we're doing art between the wars. The title alone should tell you that it's probably going to be pretty invested with issues that are happening in the world. Particularly today, we're starting off with Dadaism, which is solely interested in World War I. And we're also going to be delving a little bit into communism and art produced with that movement. And we're also going to be talking about art that showcases government policies in the US and Mexico today. So a good chunk of the art that we're discussing today has to do with primarily politics as well as wars. Same with tomorrow. Tomorrow is mostly about World War II. We're in 23. Yeah, it'd be a good day to have a book, because like I said, I did have to take about 20 things out. So I mean, if you have your book and you're following along, it is in order, but you'll get more pictures in the book than you will in class today. I just chose the main ones that I like to talk about the most and I find the most interesting. But if you've got your book, you'll see a bunch of others too. A good chunk of your final also comes from chapters 23 and 24 as well. and I'll try and remember, once again, for the first class, I did not remember, but I'll try and remember to point out what things you're going to specifically want to know. So as I said, we are starting with Dadaism and Dada art today. Dada art began as a bit of a sarcastic way for artists to blow off steam pertaining to their frustrations with World War I. So if you are on, well, any social media platform really, but I see it a lot on TikTok, the people that get on there and make sarcastic skits about government policies and world affairs, yeah, that's Dadaism. No, it's not. But that's basically the same thing that these artists are doing. They're trying to sarcastically express their feelings on World War I. Most people that dislike Dada art are not grasping that it's done for humor. World War I, obviously a very dark, depressing time. It was the first war on a grand stage. It was the deadliest war in world history at that point in time. People thought the world was going to end. It was pretty bad.
Was it during World War I when you were like the clock, you know? I don't know. No, that was during Cold War, right? Like, isn't there like a doomsday clock or something?
That's
like
Cold War. Yeah, that was the Cold War. During every major event, though, people always think the world's going to end. Like, not even major events.
Yeah.
People always think the world's going to end. I mean, it may eventually, but
like 9 years ago.
yeah, when the Mayan calendar ended in 20 something. And then like a few months ago, they said it was going to end again in December. Yeah, it's like every year they say the world's going to end. But hey, I mean, World War I had to have been probably a pretty scary place, particularly in Europe, which is where the Dada art movement is happening. It's happening in France, Germany, and England, those main countries in Northwestern Europe. Primarily France. And it was, like I said, a way for artists to humorously express what they were going through at that moment in time. So when viewing Dada art, we do have to look at it with a bit of a playfulness and not take it too seriously. These artists didn't take themselves seriously. Just like those TikTokers doing those sarcastic skits, they aren't taking themselves very seriously. They're trying to do something entertaining. That's exactly what these guys are doing. They're doing something entertaining to kill the time and make things a little bit more lighthearted in the dark and depressing thing that was World War I. The way that the Dada artist Marcel Duchamp chose to do this and express himself was through ready-mades. Yesterday we talked about Duchamp with nude descending the staircase and stroboscopic photography. He ends up evolving past that during World War I into the realm of ready-mades. Ready-mades, you love them or you hate them. They are ready-made objects, meaning they are already made. He went to a store, bought them, and put them on a pedestal and call it art. He didn't make anything. He bought it. Which is why it's called a ready-made, because it's already made. We're going to look at a few different Duchamps that are ready-made, beginning with LHOOQ, which is a postcard that he went to the Louvre gift store and purchased. Like he went to the Louvre, and instead of seeing the art itself, he went to the gift shop, which is at the front, bought a postcard, because if you've ever been to an art museum before, you'll know that most of the major famous paintings will have a postcard that you can purchase representing them. He bought the Mona Lisa, and he drew a mustache and a beard on it in pencil. And then wrote LHOOQ at the bottom, framed it, and displayed it in a gallery, and called it art. You get why it's called ready-made. You also get why I said with Dada art, you have to have a bit of a sense of humor in order to really appreciate it. It's not supposed to be serious at all. This was how Duchamp felt he wanted to express himself at that moment. He felt like he needed to have a bit of a fun time versus be super serious, because the world itself was already serious. He didn't want to be that way. LHOOQ, when you say that in French, it says a sentence, and that is translated in English to "she has a nice ass." That is what that title is. She has a nice ass. Of course, you can't see Mona Lisa's butt at all, which is also adding to that level of sarcasm. It's just a very sarcastic, humorous piece. And if you have a good sense of humor like that, you can appreciate it. If you don't have a good sense of humor like that, you cannot appreciate it. It just depends on who you are and your personality. And that's how ready-mades are. Here's another ready-made from Duchamp. This is a snow shovel. He went to the hardware store. We even know which hardware store he went to, and bought a snow shovel and went to a gallery and set it up with a plate next to it that said "In Advance of a Broken Arm" as the title. It is technically an extension of your arm when you're using a shovel, which is why he used that title, because it's "In Advance of a Broken Arm." It's an extension of yourself. This is the 4th version, because people kept accidentally throwing them away. That happens with a lot of the ready-mades. People don't realize that it's an art piece because it doesn't look like one. The shovel from a hardware store, it even has a little label on it from where it's from.
He didn't make it, he just like.
He didn't make it. Yeah, that's why they're ready-made. He didn't make them. He just bought them or found them. Just put it there. Yep. There's an artist in New York a few years ago that would go to gallery openings and collect all of the trash from the people that attended. Because if you've never been to a gallery opening, they serve drinks and food there. So he collected all the trash, and at the front display windows of the galleries, he arranged sculptures using the trash. The custodians didn't know. So they kept going and cleaning it up afterwards. And the gallery owners would come in the next day and be like, "Where did the sculpture go?" Which, I mean, that's what happens when you use things that don't look like they are art. But it also enters the territory of what is acceptable as art. Like, is this acceptable? Duchamp was trying to push the envelope there, definitely. Art's usually something that is made and has some level of creativity involved with it. This isn't made by him. There's not very much creativity there. So really pushing the boundaries. Obviously, art critics probably weren't well receptive of these because they didn't consider it art. Duchamp he was not successful during his career. It wasn't until afterwards that people really started to appreciate his stuff and his style. There's the most famous Duchamp. This is Fountain. Obviously, it's a urinal. He found it in a dumpster and signed it with the name Armut. We don't know why. And put the date 1917. Then he carried the urinal to the art gallery, flipped it over on its back, and put it on a pedestal. Pedestals are reserved for sculptures that are going to be sold, and titled it Fountain. Yeah, I mean, technically it's a fountain. Technically. Nowhere, because it was also accidentally thrown away. There is only a photograph left. Yes. So that is a good question. It is not displayed at all. That's just a photograph that we have. I mean, you could easily recreate it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be too hard. Man Ray is another artist that followed Duchamp's style. Man Ray will later on become more well known for his photography. and is one of the first really LGBTQ artists to gain a name in the art world. He's more known for taking photographs of himself in an androgynous mask and makeup and clothing, really trying the question, is it a man, is it a woman? I don't know. So pushing the limits that way later on, but in his early career, he closely did what Duchamp did. This is another ready-made, it's called Gift. It's obviously not a gift. Possibly. Yeah, you probably did. But yeah, it's just an iron with thumbtacks glued to it. You can't use it. Yep, it's another ready-made. So Dada art, very absurd, sarcastic, playful. You gotta have a sense of humor to really appreciate it. It is a product of the world that it existed in at that point in history. Surrealism is another product of the world during this time, but very different. Surrealism is a product of psychological studies. So yesterday I mentioned Sigmund Freud and Jung and Schrodinger's cat. That was the other one. I finally remembered the name. But we mentioned them yesterday, major psychologists from that time. Artists would read these textbooks and their theories and gain inspiration from them. That group of artists that is looking at the psychologists' writings are surrealist artists. The surrealist artists are concerned with visually portraying their unconscious mind, dreams, fantasies, and hallucinations, and reading into those visual portrayals and studying them to try and figure out what their mind is trying to tell them. We will still see a bit of absurdity like we did with the Dada art, but it is combined with psychological studies, meaning that we've gone beyond just making art for goofy fun's sake. And now we are giving it a bit of a purpose. The first surrealist artist we're going to look at is Max Ernst the Horde. We'll look at, I think, about 4 different surrealist artists. Every one of these members of this group, they did associate with each other. There was a surrealist manifesto. They were working in a group in France, but they all did things very differently. They all had their own preferred method on how they wanted to best understand their minds. Max Ernst used the frottage method. It's a very fancy sounding word that is really very simple. It is a rubbing. So how to do a frottage, you get a piece of paper and a wax crayon or a Crayola crayon. You take the paper off the crayon, you put the paper onto a textured surface like concrete or asphalt, you rub the crayon against it, and you get the texture on the paper.
I did that with my kids.
Yeah, that's frottage. You can sound fancy next time. We'll be talking about this one next. So the artists like Max Ernst that did frottage, they would stare at those little textured surfaces and try and basically do like an ink blot test and see images inside of it. And they would outline whatever they saw on the paper and then transfer it into a really large oil canvas. So when Max Ernst did the frottage that we're about to look at, he came up with a horde of monsters, which is why it's titled The Horde. And it looks like this. So he got a piece of paper, a crayon, he went outside onto some asphalt, just rubbed it, and then stared at it for a really long time, and traced the outlines of these creatures, and then painted them onto a canvas. That's literally it. You can do this at home. You too can be Max Ernst. Now, what do you think this says about his mental state?
Wasn't very good.
Why do you think?
I know, if you were in a good mental state, you probably wouldn't be thinking about it.
Probably not.
What if you like swirling?
What is the swirling?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's portage, man. It doesn't mean anything.
Somebody else, they have like swirling and then it's like saying like if they have everything in their mind.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
stress is the last thing.
I see stress.
Yeah.
That's what I see.
Yeah.
Someone that's stressed out. Possibly he might have been stressed. I don't know. It's really like I said, it's like an ink blot test.
Yeah.
Who knows what it means for who is doing it and who is looking at it. But I see stress. So does that mean I'm stressed? Maybe. I don't know. Are you stressed, Brandon?
Yeah.
So am I. I am actually stressed. So maybe it does work. I don't know. Dolly is another surrealist artist. He is doing something entirely different from Frottage, and a little bit more appreciated, I think, by viewers. Most people have seen the painting that we're about to look at. It's pretty famous. The Persistence of Memory. So Dolly, instead of trying to see objects in rubbings, he would paint his dreams. We've looked at Dolly before with the Andalusian Dog. He did the film that didn't really make any sense because it was just a bunch of random objects that looked like they should go together, but they didn't. That's exactly how his paintings are as well. There are recognizable objects, but they are not real objects. They can't exist in this plane. They are made up, but they look real. That's because he's using very illusionistic motifs and subject matter, but using academic painting techniques to paint them, meaning he's making them look realistic and detailed and giving them depth and dimension and giving the picture plane depth and dimension. So the persistence of memory, according to Dolly, is about warped time or losing time. And he calls it a self-portrait of himself. There is technically a kind of sort of self-portrait in it. And it does show a juxtaposition of random unrelated objects. We do recognize the objects, well, some of them. There's one in there you won't recognize, but they don't quite make sense, just like dreams. And here is the persistence of memory. So you'll notice the ocean and skyline in the background. There's the beach, a little mountain cliff area, pedestal with a tree, a dead tree on top of it with a melting clock hanging off the side. We have two other melting clocks, as well as a pocket watch covered in ants. And here is Dolly's self-portrait. He's literally melting into the beach, just like the clocks. Like I said, it shows to him, or how he read it, his worry about losing time, which I think translates pretty well. Time is wasting away.
I like the Salvador Dali movie. Really cool.
Oh yeah? Did you see this one?
No, they had like more, they had a lot of the originals, but they
Yeah.
weren't like well known because a lot of them were just like.
Yeah.
corrected, but
Yeah.
They had that here, but it wasn't the original.
I saw this one in person. It's small. It's not like you see it everywhere. Like I'd seen it on TV, on the internet. When you see things frequently, you expect them to be really grand paintings. I mean, 9 by 13 isn't too small, but you expect it to be a lot bigger than
Yeah, like,
it is.
the Mona Lisa,
That one's really small too.
And they're like,
Yeah. Well, the thing with the Mona Lisa is there's tons of people crowding around it, trying to take a picture. So like their phones are in the way and you can't even really see it.
This is a giant glass thing.
Yeah. And you have to wait in line to see it too. So it's not, there's other things that I would rather see in the Louvre that I don't have to wait in line for.
Yeah.
They're a lot more impressive than that. So I mean, it's one of those, there's another one today that we're gonna be talking about. It's one of those paintings that gets a lot of hype. And then when you see it in reality, you're kind of let down. There's some paintings that get a lot of hype, and when you see them, they deserve the hype. Like Seurat's Afternoon on La Grande Jatte, that one deserves the hype that it gets. It's really awesome to see in person. And there's a few others that I can think of too. Jan van Eyck's The Arnolfini Portrait, that one's really cool to see in person. There's a few that really do deserve the hype that they get, and then there's a few that I'm like, it's not that cool. And I like some of Dali's works better than this one. This is just the one he's known for. Now, another surrealist artist who is doing something similar to Frottage, but a little bit different, is Juan Miro. He is doing automatism, which is a form of abstract surrealism, just like Frottage is. Frottage is also a form of abstract surrealism. And it is this. So literally to do automatism, you can do this with your kids at home too. You're just scribbling mindlessly without any aim in sight. And then after you get your scribbles done, you try and make stuff out of them. I'm pretty sure little kids do that. That's automatism. Now you know fancy names for things that little kids do. Yeah, it's the same method of staring at things, trying to make objects, just like an ink blot test, and supposedly those objects tell you something about yourself. This would also be done on a piece of paper with a pencil and then transferred onto a canvas with oil paint afterwards. So for the painting by Juan Miro that we're about to look at, Woman Hunted, I'm not going to say the rest of the title because it's crazy long. He uses a lot of playful imaginary creatures that look quite innocent at first glance, but they're actually kind of terrifying. I don't know, to think that maybe like this might be happening in his mind is not a good thing. So here is Woman Hunted by the passage of the bird dragonfly omen of bad news. Here's the woman. She is screaming in terror. Her tongue is sticking out. Here's our dragonfly. He looks kind of cute. He looks like a little kid's dragonfly. And our bad omen, who has a skull face. So what do you think this tells us about Juan Miro's unconscious?
He has nightmares.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's what I always think of too. I'm like, he must have like really
Yeah.
bad night terrors or be afraid of something. It's not a positive image. It looks quite plain and playful at first glance, but once you read into it, that woman screaming really like solidifies it. That's not a normal scream. That's like literal terror. So yeah, we looked at Max Ernst doing Frottage, Dali reading his dreams, and Miro doing automatism. We have one more surrealist artist, but he is doing something entirely different, and that is Rene Magritte. Magritte is not interested in his own subconscious. He's interested in the viewer's subconscious. He's more interested in what you are going to think when you see something than what he thinks. He is also a bit sarcastic and playful with his paintings, like the Dada artists were. That'll make sense when we look at The Lover. So he's still interested in the subconscious, but very much different from the rest of them. He wants to know what you're thinking, what's going on in your brain. So here's The Lover. What do you think of when you see this?
Well, be like,
It's like it is.
but not.
So happy, sad, funny, what? Bad relationship, maybe?
Yeah. The colors are really dull, so it's
Okay,
like kidnapping.
kidnapping, yeah,
A masked lover.
maybe.
So, I mean,
So we're all getting different things, because guess what I think?
But
I think it's hilarious.
What?
I think it's funny as all get out. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, because there's someone else in this room that has a funny sense of humor like I do.
doesn't make sense. I don't know.
So, like I said, this is supposed to say more about you than him. What does this say about me? That I have a really twisted sense of humor. Because I think it's really ironic that they are never going to be able to kiss. They aren't really lovers. They can't be lovers. I think that's ironic and slightly humorous. Other people, like you guys said, think it's sad, a bad relationship, not happy at all. So every person is going to see something a little bit different. And it's supposed to tell you something about your own mind or something that you might be going through. Possibly. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. You're going through a kidnapping, Susan. Should we be worried? This is another room named Agreed. We've looked at this one. This is the treachery of images. This is another fun, playful one. Some people think it is a pipe. Some people think it's not a pipe. Just depends on who you ask.
Picture of the.
Picture of a pipe, yeah. That takes us out of surrealism. And next we're going to see what has advanced with Cubism. Yesterday when we left off with Cubism, we talked about basic beginning Cubism, which you could still read things legibly. Then synthetic and analytical Cubism. Analytical Cubism was really achromatic and hard to digest. And synthetic Cubism used mixed media materials versus just painting. In parts of the world, artists become very interested in particularly shapes because of what the Cubists were able to do with them. The Cubists were able to create really interesting, well-received by the critics paintings, just using cubes and squares and triangles. So other artists wanted to try their hand at that as well. This sparks several different trends throughout the world, the first of which being suprematism from Russia, of exploring the power of shapes and colors. So suprematism is concerned with the supreme power, which is why it's called suprematism, of shapes and colors. It was sparked by Kazimir Malevich. Once again, this is in Russia. We're going to be going to Russia several times today. Huh?
Right?
What?
Is it linked with the Nazi communist?
No, the next one is.
Uh,
This one isn't. The next one is. Not yet. This is right before that one though, and this one ends up influencing that one. So Malevich will take pieces of colored construction paper and cut them up into squares and rectangles and play with them on a desk to come up with compositions, and then he will paint what he has made with the construction paper onto oil canvas. So the first one we're going to look at from him is an airplane flying. That is his interpretation of what an airplane looks like, broken down to its most basic rectilinear shapes and using just basic colors. This is it. This is an airplane flying, according to Malevich. Broken down to its most basic shapes. Do I think it's an airplane flying?
Look at it.
I mean, if you look at it like a different way, then yeah.
Yeah, with the wings.
Yeah, with the wing, yeah. Like this is the
Basic,
propeller at the top and only half the plane's there maybe and one of the wings is sticking out. So instead of having the whole plane there, this is like the propeller that spins the plane's body and one of the wings, the other wing is something. So maybe like that, but it's obviously not a literal airplane flying. It's his interpretation of it broken down into basic shapes. Like I said, he used construction paper, cut it up, and arranged it on a desk and then painted what he decided would be an interesting composition. This is suprematism. This is the supreme study of shapes and colors. So all he's done is use shapes and colors. Here is another Malevich. This is 8 red rectangles. Once again, it's just basic shapes. Yep.
Oh, it looks cool.
He's not
I think,
interested in objects so much as he's interested in the shapes. This will, like Brandon was sending out a second ago, end up morphing into something else that is used by the communists and the Nazis. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, we're going to talk about what's happening to Cubism in Italy. So at the same time as suprematism in Russia, Ferdinand Leger is also grasping onto Cubism, but he is taking a very different route. So if you remember yesterday with Cubism, it's mostly triangles, squares, and rectangles. Leger decides to add in circles and ovals, as well as color, which makes them a little bit easier to read than analytical Cubism. He's still trying to show multiple viewpoints of objects at the same time, but because he's using the color to denote different objects, it's a lot easier to understand. So this is the city. It looks complex at first glance. It's a bunch of long vertical striped areas, but if you break it down, you can kind of figure out what most things are. This is a sign. Here's a telephone pole breaking up the image there. We have in the background some writing, which also looks a bit like skyscraper lights. Here's a crosswalk with people walking on it.
And there's a tower, right?
Yeah, there's a tower back here.
Yeah.
There's a roadway here. You can figure out what most things are in this painting, but it's still showing those multiple viewpoints of a city at the same time. But we're using more interesting shapes as well as colors. No, this one's Italy. He is in Italy, so it's some Italian city. I don't know which one.
At the bottom.
No, it's located in
Oh,
Paris.
okay, okay.
It's located in Paris. But he's working in Italy. So some Italian city. I don't know which one. He's more well known for this painting, The Three Women, which is his take on Les Demoiselles d'Avignon from Picasso yesterday. So that painting was of nude women and a bowl of fruit. This one is nude women and also some food. But like I said, we see different shapes as well as a lot more color usage. He's even added in repetitive patterns to help break things up and make the composition a little bit more interesting to look at. So we have 3 large women comprised of ovals and circles, even the cat back there. They're in a living room and yeah, chilling. They're eating and drinking tea, yeah.
What is the middle?
What do you mean the middle?
From the cat, like right next to the lady, right there.
Oh yeah, it looks like there's another person. This is this woman's butt.
Oh.
And
Okay.
down here's the couch. She kind of like merges into the couch. Yeah, that's a good question. So it's still reminiscent of Cubism, but a new spin on it, a new updated spin. And it's not bad. I like Ferdinand Leger.
Cool.
He does film too. His films I don't like. Like I like this. I like the last one. I don't like his films. They're a bit kaleidoscopy. So if you've ever looked at a kaleidoscope, he likes to use the shapes just like in here, but on film. So he will go to cut scenes of a kaleidoscope, cut scenes of machines because he's really interested in machinery, and cut scenes of like body parts of people. It's weird. And then the film that I'm thinking of, which is the one in your book, the soundtrack to it is like sirens, which is, I don't like loud noises. So why I don't show that film. Like, I just don't like loud noises. But hey, if you're interested, that film is on YouTube and you can check it out. It's cool to see one. Now, the thing that Brandon was mentioning that has to do with communism and Nazis is constructivism. So suprematism will end up evolving into constructivism when Russia ends and the Soviet Union begins. Constructivism still uses that idea of primary colors and shapes, but it's now using them to capture people's attentions for advertisement posters to try and encourage support of communism and Nazi Germany. Yeah. And I wasn't going to show one of the advertisements, but I guess I can because there's no one online and I don't like having to flip back to sharing screens. So constructivism in its most basic form, we still have those basic shapes and primary colors. This was for a billboard poster as well as some smaller posters and flyers to encourage the shift into communism in Russia.
So it's propaganda.
It is propaganda, yes. Most constructivist art is made for the purpose of propaganda. But it's taking those original ideas from the suprematists and giving them a bit more of a purpose or a function.
Yeah, it looks more like an ad.
It is an ad.
Well, on it now.
Right, yeah.
They were heavily reprinted.
Yes. They were everywhere. So during this time period, if you were going to be an artist, in case you didn't know, under communism, the government tells you what your job's going to be. And if you were an artist there, the government told you what to make. So there is no freedom. We're going to see that happen in the US too later on. There's still a little bit of freedom, but not much. Versus in the rest of Europe with like Leger and even under suprematism, there was still freedom. That is now gone during constructivism in Germany and Russia at this point. So that's an advertisement. We're going to look at one painting that was done by Popova, painterly architectonic, under the constructivist era. It is not an advertisement or propaganda. It's just a painting, but it still uses the same basic shapes and colors. It does take it beyond what Malevich was doing, though, and makes it a lot more interesting to look at. So this is Popova's painterly architectonic. You still see those basic shapes and mostly primary colors. You have a little bit of green in there. But she is twisted the shapes and made them intersect with each other, as well as added lights and darks and shading to create some dimension to the painting versus just here's a red square, like Malevich was doing. So it's like suprematism just taken to another level, just like Leger was taking Cubism to a new level. And we'll come back to Russia again later on too, because we're going to be talking about politics in a moment, even more than we already have. But first, let's see what's happening in Amsterdam. Amsterdam's doing their own thing. And that thing is the style, or de stijl, which translates to the style. It was invented by Piet Mondrian. Mondrian went to art school just like pretty much everyone else we're talking about today. And he started off doing impressionist style artwork. So if you remember way back to Monet and Renoir and all those guys, that was the style he started off doing. He decided that was not for him. So he was going to try his hand at Cubism. He decided that was not for him either. So he decided he's going to make his own stinking style because nothing else works for him. So he comes up with the style. He decides that the style, or de stijl, is going to be the best style ever. There's never going to be another style to follow it because it's going to be the final one. There's nothing else that's going to trump it. Obviously, he was wrong because we still have 2 chapters left. But style is kind of interesting. It was adopted by fashion industry as well as architectural and furniture producers because it was so popular at the time. It spread across the entire world, even though it started in Amsterdam. It is comprised of vertical and horizontal lines and primary colors. This is the style. Yeah, this is going to be the final style of art. Yeah. You've probably seen it all over the place. It was really popular in clothing in like the 60s to do that. Furniture companies in the 20s and 30s designed furniture like that. You'll still see people doing it today. It just keeps re-emerging and being recycled over and over again, like trends usually are. It's quite easy to do. You just paint a canvas white and you get painter's tape and you block off sections and then you paint them in solid blocks of color. We know that's exactly how Mondrian did it because some of his paintings still have the tape on them. So, yeah.
Yeah,
fun
I'm
stuff.
going to do that. My bedroom.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's cool. I like it. It's neat. Like I said, it did carry over into architecture. The Schroeder House, if you have some free time, I'd Google it. There's a tour on YouTube. It's kind of a longer tour though that goes through all of the house. You can kind of see in the exterior how dish steel was used. So here we have a yellow beam, black beam, red beams, lots of vertical, horizontal lines, as well as squares and rectangular shapes. The inside of the house is, I don't know. I'll pull up a picture. I wasn't going to, but it's a cool house. And like I said, if you have time to watch a video, I would recommend it because it is really neat. So the inside is entirely dish steel, including the furniture. This was all done in the 20s, all of it. You're not allowed to change any of it. The walls all move. They're all on rollers. You can kind of see it there. So you can change the layout of the floor plan whenever you want. Like I said, even the furniture is just still. Huh?
Has it been restored since then?
No, this is all original.
And this is in,
Amsterdam.
It was built in like
that's,
the 20s.
that's
Uh-huh.
some,
Yep. Yep.
that's some super smart people. Architecture.
Yep. Really, the only thing that you can tell it's from the 20s is if you go there and look at the mailbox system, it looks like it's from the 20s. But nothing else really looks like it's from the 20s. This house and others built like it are going to end up sparking something called the international style over in Europe, and it'll carry over into the US, which is based around designing buildings in rectangular shapes with a lot of windows. It'll evolve into a skyscraper. So that's where this all starts, is with the Schroeder House, as well as Corbusier's Villa Savoye, which is pretty similar to this. So yeah, it's a cool house. And if you find the tour video on YouTube, they'll show you how they like change the floor plans, and it's really nifty. There's one really, really, really cool aspect about this house that no other house has. And you'll only find it if you watch the videos. Because none of those pictures there show it. So yeah, I'd recommend the video.
I have a friend here in town, his parents, they have 4 hidden slides in their 4-story house.
Yeah,
Yeah, like you push a wall and the whole wall will just.
yeah.
I mean,
I think it's so cool when
I think it goes all the way down. It's so.
houses like that are so neat. So now we're going to take a brief detour from art made for personal expression of emotions, and now we're going to go on to art made by artists as a means to express their political beliefs and ideas. So, like I said, we're getting into the politics section now, beginning with Picasso's Guernica. Guernica is a really, really famous painting. It's Picasso's masterpiece. Like, Picasso's really famous. Almost everyone's heard of him. This is the most important Picasso work. It's huge. It would take up pretty much this entire wall over here. Giant piece. It's 11.5 feet tall and 25.5 feet long. It's huge. He made it extremely large in order to capture people's attention. He didn't want it to be ignored because it was extremely important for him to get his message across. Has anyone heard of Guernica?
Yeah, we talked about it before.
Okay, we did? Okay. Did I tell you it was because of a town that was bombed? Maybe. Okay. So I'm just going to switch to that page. Guernica is about a newspaper clipping that Picasso read about. It was one of those moments in history that a government tried to sweep something under the rug and they just didn't accomplish it because of this. The president of Spain was trying to get on Hitler's good side right before World War II happened. And he allowed Hitler to test out his bombs, his plane bombs, in Spain on a town named Guernica that people lived in, hundreds of people lived in. All of the people ended up dying. They were not informed that they were going to be bombed. No one knew it was coming. And like I said, Picasso read about it in a small newspaper clipping, really, really small. He was shocked. He couldn't find any information about it anywhere else. No clue. So the president was trying to hide the information from the public as to what happened. Shortly after he read about the event, the same president of Spain came to Picasso and asked him if he would paint a painting to represent Spain in the World's Fair that year. Does anyone know what a World's Fair is? It's kind of what it sounds.
Yeah.
So every major country submits like an invention or a piece of art to represent what's amazing about that country at that moment in time. Picasso did Guernica to represent Spain. That Spanish president did not have a clue.
He was like, oh yeah, okay.
He was like, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it. He does this. The president goes to the World's Fair opening day, sees Guernica, is furious, goes to Picasso and says, if you ever come back to Spain, I'm going to arrest you and you will never get out of jail. We'll hear more about that Spanish president tomorrow. His story is not over yet. But Picasso did Guernica because he wanted the world to know what happened. And he accomplished that, which is why it's also really, really large. There's even an entire movie about this event now. So he's still stuck to his Cubist roots in making things mostly basic geometric shapes. He's added a lot more detail on this one, though, than previous Cubist paintings. He wants to make it more legible.
And it's on a wall.
It is on a wall. Well, no, it's not on a wall. It's on a canvas. It's hung on a wall. So it's oil on canvas. It's all black and white and gray because he read about it in a newspaper, which is black and white and gray. So he's copying that format. Where is it?
Yeah.
It's in New York. No, there is not a color version of it. It might be a copy, but it's not a Picasso. This is pretty famous, so people do try and copy it sometimes, but Picasso is this is the Picasso one. So here you see horses screaming, people screaming in agony, just to represent the fact that they had no clue. They didn't know it was going to happen. And this is the one that I think I've talked about before. This represents God's all-seeing eye. So even though the president tried to hide it, God saw it, and now the rest of the world is going to see it too. So you can't hide it anymore. And like I said, we'll hear more about that president tomorrow. So this is the first example of political expression we're going to look at. This is Picasso's political expression of how he felt about his home country of Spain. He was living in France at the time, so not in Spain. He actually didn't go back to Spain. Our next example of political expression is from Russia, well, the USSR at that time. And that is Vera Mukina's Monument to the Proletariat and Agriculture. It is another example of art that was made to make communism look good. So once again, in Russia or the Soviet Union at the time, if you were an artist, you had to get your work approved to make it. Vera Mukina submitted this idea to the government in Russia, and it was accepted. And they made this huge 78-foot tall statue to celebrate communism. So here we have a hammer and a sickle up at the top, which are the symbols of communism. It's on all of the communist flags if you ever look at it. And it represents manufacturing and agriculture, the two mainstream jobs of a communist government, how they function and survive. And of course, a man and a woman. The interesting thing about this, though, is that the man and woman are being shown as equals. That is because in communism, the way it's supposed to work, in the utopian society that it's supposed to be, there are no class systems, and there is equality with everyone, including the sexes. So they're trying to represent what this is supposedly like in communist Russia by showing these two figures on equal ground. A lot of the art that we've talked about so far has shown women either behind the men or smaller than the men. So this is an interesting example. Also, you might have noticed that the only two female artists we've talked about today, Miss Popova and Miss Mukina, are both from Russia. We haven't talked about any other female artists today. It's just a little interesting side note that I like to think about sometimes. So this is obviously no longer on display because communism is over in Russia. It has been taken down and it's stored in an airplane hangar now. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how it's like, oh, that's still there.
It's huge. It's huge. So I don't know if the 78 feet include the cement pedestal or if it's just the stainless steel statue. I really don't know.
That looks way taller than the
But the pedestal is still there. They just put something else on top of it. The statue is what was taken down. So, yeah. Really interesting. Some more political expressions. This one is going to be from Mexico now. Diego Rivera. Diego Rivera, another proponent of communism. He really supported communism in a lot of his artwork. And after the Mexican Revolution, he was hoping that Mexico would become communist. So he made a bunch of artwork trying to support that change in hopes that it would happen. So the image that we're going to look at from Rivera is The Liberation of the Peon. It is a fresco. If you remember back to our frescoes, we talked about Rivera then. That's what he does. He's known for his large wall paintings. Here is your Liberation of the Peon. So these men have just gone and liberated this peon or slave from the landlord's plantation in the background. They set the manor and plantation on fire as well when they rescued him. So once again, trying to eliminate class systems. That's an extremely appealing notion to a lot of countries at this point in history. So he's trying to show people, hey, if we convert to communism or switch to being a communist government, we won't have class systems anymore. We won't have things like this. And trying to encourage others to follow suit. So using art as a means of political expressions once again. Now, let's see what else is happening in Latin America that is not political. We're going to take a quick peek at Amaral and Zul Solar, as well as Frida Kahlo. European culture has a lot of influence on Latin American art to this day. That's because a good chunk of Latin American artists will go to other countries to learn how to do art. In this time period, the place to go to study art was Paris, because you had people like Picasso living there to teach you. Who wouldn't want to learn from one of the world famous masters on how to make art? So a good chunk of these Latin American artists would go to Paris, London, some even went to the US to learn how to paint and draw and sketch and things like that. Amaral is one of those artists, as well as Jules Soler. Because they're going to these European cities, they are basically, it's called cannibalizing your art form. They are eating or absorbing the art styles of the European artists into their own style. So it's going to be a merger of European culture or art and Latin American culture or art in these Latin American artists that we're about to look at, starting with Amaral's Abapuro. So Abapuro combines a bit of surrealism with Latin American motifs. I wouldn't say it's Latin American culture, I'd say Latin American motifs in his painting. So here you see an object or several objects that are recognizable, but they are not shown in an ordinary manner, a bit like the European artists that we've looked at so far, particularly Dali that we've seen today. A man who starts off very, very small and then gets really large, making it seem like his foot is very close to the forefront of the picture plane and his head is extremely far away. He's sitting on top of a mountain. Behind him is a saguaro cactus, and up in the sky is a sun. So we have a European painting style combined with some Latin American motifs, those motifs being the saguaro cactus and that sun, which is actually a citrus fruit cut in half, or a wedge or a slice of a citrus fruit. Amaral is from Brazil, so he's trying to showcase his skills that he's picked up in Europe, but still the fact that he is not a European artist by incorporating those small symbols there. Now, another artist that we're going to look at is Jules Soler from Argentina and his dragon painting, which is watercolor on paper. Jules Soler is not originally called Jules Soler. He named himself that. It means sun. Jules is sun, Soler is sun. Call himself sun. Most of his artworks will have a sun in them, which is up in the top corner over here. And in the painting, you'll notice a god or goddess riding a serpent dragon. Both of these are traditional motifs in Central American art. So if any of you guys are doing Mayan or Aztec art in your individual presentations, you're going to come across particularly a serpent goddess. It looks just like this. Well, not quite exactly like this, but it's a carving of a snake and a goddess riding it. So he pulled that from traditional Latin American roots, but he's combined some European elements as well, particularly all of the flags. You'll notice he's got flags of multiple different countries there. That's to show all of the countries that he studied in. So he went all over the world to learn how to make art. You'll also notice the three major world religions on the top of the dragon's head. So we have Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. He went to all of those countries as well that had those religions, and he decided after visiting all three, learning about all three of those religions, that they have no reason to be fighting each other and they should just get along, because they really aren't all that different. So yes, this is just a combination of basically Jules Soler's life into a painting. Now, a little bit more digestible for people probably is Frida Kahlo's work. Almost everyone's probably heard of Frida Kahlo. She's really popular in this particular region, as well as Mexico. And Mexico, she is half European, half Mexican. And this painting portrays Frida Kahlo's European side and Frida Kahlo's Mexican side. One of the reasons why Frida is so interesting is she kept a diary, so we know a lot about what was going on in her mind most of the time. And in her writings, she discusses frequently the internal struggle that she has between her European side and her Mexican side. She doesn't know if she's supposed to show the public Mexican Frida or European Frida. If she's with her family, she's supposed to be Mexican Frida. If she's at an art gallery, she's supposed to be a European Frida. And this is exactly what that shows.
Like this is yours and.
Yeah. So they are connected. One can't survive without the other. This one has the heart, and this one has the clamp keeping the other one alive from bleeding out. They cannot be separated. They will not function. But at the time, they are two separate entities. The one in white is your European Frida. The other one is the Mexican Frida. There's a lot of other interesting facts about Frida Kahlo as well. A lot of her works have to do with a car accident that she had when she was younger. She had to go through many, many surgeries to deal with it. She was in constant pain. She was bedridden for a good chunk of her life because of it. Because of that accident, she couldn't have kids. That bugged her a lot. She paints a lot of paintings about that she feels ugly and broken and like she's not a woman because she can't have kids. Her husband does not help that forefront. Her husband is Diego Rivera, the guy that we just talked about, and he cheats on her all the time. And she thinks it's because she can't have kids. I think it's just him. But yes, we know a lot about Frida because of those journals that she kept, which is really helpful. And her artwork is extremely interesting to look at because we know all of that information about her and what is going on in her mind when she's painting this. So this is almost a bit surrealist inspired if we're connecting it to European studies. So she is struggling with her unconscious there in this painting, but she's still combining some Mexican elements because she is Mexican. She can't just ignore that fact, even if it's not popular or well received by the art public. It still exists. Now, what's happening in America or the US? This is where we're going to end off in the US today, and we're going to pick up in the US tomorrow. So in Europe, they're doing fascinating things with their art, like surrealism, cubism, constructivism, suprematism. A lot of self-expression is happening, particularly in France. In America, we are dealing with a financial crisis and the Dust Bowl at the same time, which leaves a lot of artists unemployed. You should take really good notes on this part, by the way. I should mention that. You should take really good notes on this part. It leaves a lot of artists unemployed because who's going to want to buy art when you can't even buy bread? So the government ends up creating jobs for artists. It's called the Works Progress Administration. And artists are asked to go around and showcase America. We've talked about this before, particularly with this Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother photograph. It came up in photography. This Works Progress Administration has pretty set standards on what they're expecting the artists that they're paying to make. The artworks are meant for public buildings like post office and federal buildings and city halls. So you would want something for that area that's easily digestible for the masses to understand, because you're not having some art critic go to a post office. Susie down the street's going to the post office. You got to make it easy for Susie to understand, not an art critic. So in contrast to what's happening in Europe, which are these high intellectual things, in America, we have easily digestible images with stories happening. Like I said, most of them are positive because we want to have positivity during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, and we want to show America in a positive light. Nighthawks is a rare exception. It was made by the American regionalist artist Edward Hopper. Nighthawks shows like I like to think that Nighthawks is how America really is versus the others are how America wants to be. But that's a bit pessimistic, I think. Nighthawks showcases the loneliness of living in America that we sometimes can encounter. Probably very much so last week during the power outages. So this is a very famous painting. This is another one that it's like one of those that has a lot of hype, and then you see it in person and it's like, oh. This is also in Chicago if you're interested in seeing it. And the composition was very well thought out. So in the background, in the light, so we have a lot of light in this area. We see a couple and the soda shop owner there clearly having conversation. And then over in the dark, you have a single person sitting by themselves. So this just shows the contrast that things might appear bright and happy in America to the rest of the world, but in reality, a good chunk of people are very disconnected and lonely. It's a bit of a dark image, which is very different from most American regionalist artists. Most American regionalist artists are doing things like this guy, Grant Wood. Grant Wood's American Gothic is a celebration of agriculture in America. It gets its name American Gothic because of the American style farmhouse with the Gothic window. He just put the two together and American Gothic was born. He is very inspired by Jan van Eyck and Albrecht Dürer. Those guys are Northern Renaissance artists. If you watched that video or read that section of the book, you would have learned about them. They like to do things looking very realistic. Edward Topper's painting was also very realistic and legible to read. It is on beaver wood. That is because of his inspiration of Van Eyck and Dürer. Both of those guys would have painted on wood. So he too is painting on wood, what they did. So it's what he's going to do because he idolizes them. So this is American Gothic. We've probably all seen this one. Like I said, it's named because of the building in the background. It has nothing to do with the people in the foreground. So we have an American style farmhouse with a Gothic window. That Gothic pointed arch at the top. Most of the scene is extremely realistic looking, except for the background with the trees. The trees in American regionalism, I don't know why, so don't ask, but the trees in American regionalism are cartoon-like. They are perfect spheres, and they look like cotton balls. I don't know why. Grant Wood's not the only one that did it. A lot of the American regionalist artists did it. In the foreground, we have a man and a woman. This is Grant Wood's sister and Grant Wood's dentist. They are not married. He just asked them to pose because he liked the way they looked. So there's no connection, but it is supposed to celebrate agriculture, which is why in the background we have a farmhouse, and in the foreground we have the man in overalls carrying a pitchfork, referencing a farmer, of course. And another artist that celebrated, you don't have to take a picture of that one, that celebrates America, this one is very literal, is Thomas Hart Benton. This is Achilles and Hercules. It was done right before World War II. And it is all about talking about how great America is. Which is, Thomas Hart Benton is the quintessential American regionalist artist. He grew up playing with the president. So he was really showcasing what America was supposed to look like to the rest of the world at that point in history. So here you have, of course, Hercules is a mythological figure known for his strength, and one of his mythological stories, he wrestles a bull. Here you have a young American man wrestling a powerful bull. This shows off America's strength. Remember, this is right before World War II. Got to show off America's strength. Not only that, but we're going to show off America's abundance. In the foreground, there's a bunch of lumber chopped down. That's to show off our lumber industry. And over on the side, you'll notice a cornucopia filled with vegetables and fruit to show off what we can grow and produce. These women on the cornucopia are carrying a laurel wreath. Laurel wreaths in Greek history are traditionally given to winners of the Olympic Games, so heroes basically for their people. So this is the hero. In the background, we have some more corn picking there to celebrate food. Back here, we're celebrating our transportation system. So we have a steamboat and a really large river to show to the rest of the world that we can easily transport goods wherever we need to. And then we have our lovely little African American that was added in because Thomas Hart Benton acknowledges that African Americans exist, but he keeps them separate. It's quite literally. Behind the tree, there's a farmhouse and a silo. So yeah, a little farmhouse silo. This is really all about celebrating what America is supposed to look like. Does it look like this? I don't know. According to Benton, this is what things look like, and that's why this is really the quintessential American regionalist piece to me. The other Thomas Hart Benton also celebrates America's, particularly colonization. If you want to celebrate colonization. So now, because this is really, really important, because it's a long essay question on your final. In comparison to what's happening in France, how do you think of what's happening in the US with American regionalism versus what's happening in France? What are some of the differences? What's happening? What's going on? So once again, in France, we have people like Picasso working. We have Cubism, Surrealism. They're more focused on expressing their mental emotions. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. In Europe, except for in the Soviet Union, they had total freedom of expression. Well, and Germany. You couldn't really express things in Germany either. But they had freedom of expression. In the US, we're trying to keep our artists employed. There's a big difference there. And like Natalie was saying, she perfectly summed it up there, by the way. If you could write that down, what she said, you should be good. So in Europe, they're expressing their own thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And in America, we're trying to express how we feel about America, basically. That's going to drastically change after World War II. Something really big happened. Because artists run away from France. And they come here. Well, not here, but New York. They come to Midland, Texas, no. So that is going to end up changing American art forever. Now, if you have time, I would check out African American art. I am going to talk about this one, not this one, this one because it's really cool. But African American art is a little bit different from American regionalism because it's not celebrating white America, it's celebrating African Americans and their history and their roots. It's sparked during the Harlem Renaissance, and that's really begun with a book by Alan Locke, The New Negro, which encouraged African Americans to go back to their roots in Africa.
That was what, 19?
Early 1900s, like 1930s, 40s, yeah. This is Jacob Lawrence's General Toussaint L'Ouverture defeats the English at Thleen. This is part of a series of collage works by him, telling the story of General Toussaint L'Ouverture. Has anyone heard of him? He's from Haiti. Well, not really. He's dead now, long dead. He was in Haiti when Haiti was still a French colony. It was a sugar plantation. There's a lot more to the story, but to briefly sum it up, General Toussaint was a free black man in Haiti, and he didn't like how the enslaved blacks were being treated. So he stole a bunch of guns and ammunition and knives and swords and gave it to all of the slaves, and they killed all of the white people on Haiti, and France ran away and gave up the colony. forever giving Haitians their freedom. And it ends up inspiring a lot of people, well, African Americans in America that were still slaves at that point in time to try and do the same thing. They did not succeed, but they were inspired. And it is a really, really awesome story. Haiti had a really different social system than the US did. If you have time, I'd research it because it's cool. So tomorrow we're going to pick back up at 1945. It's not too far off where we're leaving. With what happens during World War II. Like I said, it's going to change everything. More than World War I ever did. Tomorrow's really long, so come ready. But it is a cool one. Well, if you like contemporary art. If you don't like contemporary art, then you're probably going to hate tomorrow. Sorry. If you guys have questions about your group project, just let me know. I'd be glad to help. I keep working on those, but you guys sound like you're in a better position than my morning class, so be good. And I will see you all tomorrow. Have a good day. My morning class was like, well, we're not going to meet until Thursday. Are you gonna stay in here for a while? I can if you guys need to. We're just gonna stay for a little bit. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you guys need to, then I could have like down. Is that? Are you gonna stay too? Okay, fine. It's like a fun one. Yeah, I mean, not for long, but we're just gonna discuss it.